I wasn't sure why I'd shown up that day. Maybe it was the quiet desperation of a Thursday afternoon. Maybe it was the smell of old books and polished wood that made the little bookstore near the train station feel like a different world. Whatever it was, I walked in and froze, because there she was. Her name was Mara. She always seemed like she owned the air around her, not in a boastful way, but like the world had quietly accepted she belonged. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, hair that caught the light and made it look almost brown-golden, not gray. She wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, but even that felt deliberate, like she knew how to make herself look effortless without trying. I cleared my throat. "Hey," I said, though it sounded small in the vast silence of the bookstore. She looked up from the stack of journals she'd been inspecting, and I swear, the air shifted. Her lips curved in a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She tilted her head, just slightly. "Why are you here?" The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples I didn't know how to handle. I shouldn't have answered, shouldn't have let my heart betray me with something so stupid, but it came out anyway. "Because you are." Her eyebrows lifted, just a fraction, and then she laughed softly. Not the loud, easy laugh of someone trying to be friendly, more like a private acknowledgement of something secret. I felt my stomach tighten. We stood there for a long second, longer than it should have been, just two people caught in some invisible current neither of us wanted to name. I looked around the store, pretending to browse, but I couldn't. My eyes kept finding her. The way her fingers lingered over the edge of a leather-bound notebook, the small crease between her brows when she focused, the way she leaned slightly toward the sunlight coming through the window, as if she needed it to exist. "Did you need something?" she asked finally, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. I shook my head, though my hands itched to reach out and adjust the corner of the journal she had picked up. "No, just passing through," I said, even though I knew that was a lie. She studied me for a moment, and I felt the weight of it, the subtle assessment, like she was cataloging me without words. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned back to her journals. But the moment lingered, and I knew I'd feel it again in the quiet of my apartment that night. In the middle of homework I couldn't focus on. She moved with such confidence, even in that small, mundane gesture, reaching for a pen, tapping it against the notebook, flipping a page with a delicate thumb, that I felt clumsy in comparison. I wanted to know what it would feel like to be the person who could make her look up and smile like that just because I existed. Before I could embarrass myself further, I muttered something about a coffee across the street and left. But even as I walked out into the drizzling city afternoon, her gaze followed me, not in a threatening way, not like she was checking, but like she had just allowed a little crack in the world to exist, a tiny space where she had noticed me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the laugh, not the words, but the way her presence had brushed against mine and left a mark I couldn't explain. Something unspoken had passed between us, something I didn't know the name of yet. But I knew I'd chase it, quietly, carefully, until I figured out what it meant. I found myself back in the bookstore a few days later, under the excuse of returning a book I hadn't really read. In reality, I wanted to see her again, to feel that invisible thread between us, even if it pulled in ways I wasn't ready to understand. She was behind the counter, reorganizing a stack of returned novels, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly tousled like she'd run her fingers through it too many times already that morning. Her posture was tight, shoulders drawn inward, the kind of tension that spoke louder than any words. I swallowed, noticing the faint dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook just slightly as she picked up a journal. Hey," I said, and she looked up, the flicker in her eyes brief, guarded. She didn't smile immediately. "Back so soon." Her voice was calm, neutral, but not unkind. It carried that weight of someone who had learned not to lean on others too heavily. I stepped closer, pretending to browse the shelves. My eyes kept drifting back to her. I noticed the little things, the way she tapped a pen against her palm, how her fingers lingered over the spines of books as if each one was a secret, how she exhaled sharply when a customer appeared unexpectedly, like she'd been holding her breath without realizing it. "Need a hand?" I asked, Because the stack of books she was juggling looked heavier than she wanted to admit. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward me, the briefest flash of vulnerability crossing her face before she masked it again. "Maybe, just with this," she said, indicating a box that threatened to topple. Her voice was quieter than usual, almost a murmur. I took the box from her hands, careful not to touch hers. But my fingers lingered near hers for just a fraction longer than necessary. She didn't pull away, didn't acknowledge it, but I felt the shift in her posture, the subtle stiffening in her spine. We set the box down together, and for a moment, silence stretched between us. I could hear her shallow breathing, the faint rustle of paper and cardboard, and a laugh escaped her, soft, hesitant, almost embarrassed at herself for smiling. It wasn't full, but it was enough to make the room feel warmer, heavier, as if the air itself held its breath for us. You always help with everything?" she asked, tilting her head, a touch of curiosity threading her tone. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "I try," I said, not trusting my voice to carry more without giving away the truth, that I was here, quietly, endlessly, because of her. She smiled then, a little sharper this time, but she quickly looked away, glancing at a receipt. That one small act of turning her face, of masking something she hadn't meant to reveal, sent a ripple through me. I wanted to follow her gaze, to reach for it, but I stayed still, pretending to examine a shelf of books while my pulse rattled in my chest. Before I left, she gave me a brief nod, almost imperceptible, but I felt it like a spark. Something delicate and fragile had passed between us, electric in its restraint. And as I stepped back into the quiet hum of the city streets, I couldn't stop thinking about how she'd laughed, how tired she looked, how much she tried to hide herself, and how impossible it was not to notice every detail. The rain started in the late afternoon, tapping against the bookstore's tall windows in a rhythm that made the world outside feel distant. I stayed longer than I had any reason to, because Mara was there, and the quiet of the shop made every small movement feel amplified. She was perched on a stool behind the counter, sorting receipts. Her sweater was soft, the kind that made you wonder if it smelled faintly of lavender or something clean, comforting. I found myself noticing the way her fingers flexed around the papers, the small tremor when she reached for a pen, and the subtle crease at the corner of her mouth that suggested a thought she wasn't ready to share. I lingered near the magazine rack, pretending to flip through a collection of travel guides, but I couldn't concentrate. The storm outside made the shop feel like a separate world, warm, dimly lit, and dangerously intimate. "Did you hear about the—" she started, then paused, glancing at her phone. Her brow furrowed, and I noticed the faint shadow of worry cross her face. A text message notification flashed, her ex, maybe, or someone from work. I couldn't tell. She quickly put the phone aside, but the flicker of tension didn't leave her entirely. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but something in her posture told me she didn't want to answer. Instead, I moved a little closer, helping her shift a stack of books that threatened to topple again. Our hands brushed, not enough to be noticed, but enough to send a jolt up my arm. I froze, pretending to adjust a shelf while my mind raced. "You always know when to show up at the wrong, or right, time," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. Her voice was a thread of something fragile, and I felt it tug at me. I wanted to say so many things, about why I kept coming back, about the way my chest tightened when she laughed, about how every glance she gave felt like an unspoken invitation, but I didn't. I let the words curl back into my throat, swallowed by restraint and the weight of knowing I wasn't supposed to step over a line I wasn't ready to define. Thunder rolled outside, and the lights flickered. She reached for a mug of tea, her hand brushing mine again. My heart nearly betrayed me, but I stayed still, letting her take it, letting the moment stretch into something almost unbearable. We were close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her lips parted slightly when she exhaled. And for a moment, just a fleeting, almost impossible moment, I thought she might lean toward me, might bridge the distance with words or a touch. But she didn't. She sipped her tea, glanced at a new notification, and I felt the fragile thread snap just a little, leaving me with the ache of what almost happened. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched her, memorizing the tilt of her head, the subtle shift in her shoulders, knowing I'd replay it all in my mind for the rest of the night. I stepped back to the magazine rack, pretending to adjust the titles, but my chest was tight, my hands tingling from proximity. Something had passed between us, something neither of us named, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then, just as the storm outside rumbled again, our fingers brushed one last time. So light, so fleeting, but enough to leave a spark I couldn't ignore. The shop was empty that evening, the bell above the door silent since the last customer left. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening, reflective. Inside, the lamplight caught Mara's profile, sharp and soft all at once, as she stacked a new shipment of books. I stayed near the counter, pretending to organize magazines, but every glance toward her made my chest tighten. The tension between us wasn't something you could name. It wasn't flirtation, it wasn't friendship, not really. It was a current running too close, too deep, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. "You're here a lot," she said suddenly, her voice low, almost hesitant. She didn't look at me, kept her eyes on the books, but the tremor in her tone made it impossible to pretend she wasn't aware of the unspoken between us. "I like the quiet," I replied, though the words felt inadequate, clumsy. "And the books." She let out a short, ironic laugh, the kind that doesn't mask amusement. It only punctuates something complicated. "That's not it," she said. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying a vulnerability she usually masked with poise. We stood in silence for a moment, neither of us moving, as if the still air itself had weight. Then she finally met my eyes. The confidence was there, but beneath it was hesitation, a flicker of something raw. "What are we doing?" she asked. Just like that. Not a joke, not teasing, just a question that hung between us, impossible to answer. Her hands were resting on the counter, knuckles white, and I noticed the slight shake in her left hand, a human imperfection that made her real in a way I couldn't articulate. I swallowed, words lodged somewhere I couldn't reach. I wanted to say something smart, something reassuring, but the truth was heavier than any line I could craft. I didn't know. "I don't know," I admitted finally, the words tasting like honesty and failure at the same time. I can't stop thinking about this. About you." Her breath caught. She didn't reply immediately. She just stared, eyes widening slightly, searching, weighing. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pressed down on us, full of everything we hadn't said, everything we were trying not to name. She started, then stopped, shaking her head. She pressed her palms to the counter, knuckles digging in, and I saw the tension radiating from her body. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but every fiber of her being seemed on edge, as if she were balancing on the edge of something she didn't want to fall into. We stayed like that for a long moment, exchanging words through eyes, through breaths, through the faint tremor in our shoulders. The quiet was deafening, suffocating, intimate. And then, just before I could speak again, she whispered, barely audible over the hum of the overhead light, "I don't think I can do this without breaking something." The words hung between us, devastating and fragile, a confession that wasn't about love yet, but about the human cost of noticing someone too deeply. I felt my chest constrict, knowing that whatever this was, it had shifted irreversibly. I nodded slowly, afraid to say more, afraid that any word would tip the fragile balance, and I realized I'd be replaying the weight of her whisper in my mind for nights I wasn't ready to face. I hadn't expected her to open up that evening. The bookstore was quieter than usual, only the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of floorboards filling the space. Mara was behind the counter, sorting through a stack of returned journals, her hands moving almost mechanically. "You ever lose someone you thought you'd never get over?" she asked suddenly, not looking at me. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, carrying the weight of a memory she wasn't sure she wanted to relive. I froze mid-step, pretending to straighten a shelf. I think so," I said carefully, keeping my tone gentle. "Why?" She sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. I don't know. Just, sometimes things happen, people leave, and it's not about closure. It's about the small spaces they leave behind, the quiet ones that make it hard to breathe. Her hands rested on the counter, fingers curling slightly over the edge. I noticed the faint tremor again, the way her knuckles whitened, how careful she was not to let herself completely unravel. I wanted to reach across the counter, touch her hand, but I stopped. Instead, I leaned closer just enough to see the photograph she'd pulled from the journal. A faded snapshot of a younger woman, smiling, eyes alive in a way that mirrored her now, but lighter, untouched by time or loss. That's her, I asked softly. Mara's throat tightened, and she nodded, eyes flicking toward the photo but not meeting mine. My sister. She died years ago, and some days it feels like I'm still trying to catch up to the space she left behind. Her voice wavered, but she didn't break down. Instead, she exhaled slowly, steadying herself as if to remind the world she was still standing. I didn't know what to say. Words felt clumsy, inadequate, so I just let the silence stretch, letting her shoulder some of the weight without interference. My chest ached, not with pity, but with the intimacy of witnessing something so unguarded, something she rarely let anyone see. You remind me of her sometimes, she admitted, almost too quietly for me to hear. Her eyes flicked up to mine for a fraction of a second before darting away again. Not exactly. Just something in the way you notice things, the way you linger. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My hands itched to reach for her, to steady her, to tell her that some things didn't have to be as heavy, but I knew better. This wasn't about romance yet. This was about being present in a way that mattered. We stayed like that for several minutes, the hum of the heater filling the space between us, the photo still clutched in her hands. And then she let it slip back into the journal, as though the act itself was a small gesture of trust. I haven't shown this to anyone in years, she murmured, and I felt the quiet seismic shift in the room, in us, in the rhythm of what had been unspoken between us. For the first time, I realized just how fragile this connection was, how much it relied on restraint, on observation, on the simple act of being there without pushing. And yet, even in that quiet moment, I felt the ground move beneath me, subtly, imperceptibly, in a way that would change everything going forward. The bookstore smelled faintly of rain and paper, a combination that somehow made everything feel suspended, outside the usual rules of time. Mara was perched on the edge of the counter, a stack of books beside her, and I settled onto the worn rug at her feet, pretending to check a notebook. But neither of us was really doing anything. The act of being near each other was enough. We didn't speak at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was considered, deliberate, like both of us were acknowledging something without needing words. Occasionally, her knee brushed mine, just slightly, almost by accident. My hand twitched, wanting to linger, but I stayed still. She didn't move away either, and the quiet understanding between us was heavier than any conversation. I didn't expect this, she murmured finally, eyes tracing the lines of a book in her lap, but really looking at nothing at all. Expect what? I asked, careful, though my chest already knew the answer. This how it feels. Her voice was soft, hesitant, but steady enough that it carried a weight of honesty I couldn't ignore. I swallowed and nodded. I know, I said. I didn't either. But it's here. A faint smile curved her lips, just enough to be noticed. She shifted slightly, and our hands brushed, fingers barely touching. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hand rest there lightly, letting the warmth and presence speak for what words never could. She hesitated for a moment, then rested her hand over mine, almost imperceptibly, just to hold the contact. For a while, we stayed like that, connected by touch so minimal it could be mistaken for coincidence, yet so deliberate it was impossible to deny. The room held us, cocooned in quiet understanding. No declarations, no sweeping gestures, only the gravity of two people finally accepting that their connection was inevitable. You make it easier, she said at last, her voice threading through the air. Not easier in the sense of fixing anything, not in the sense of taking away the past or the complications, but easier in a way that meant being near me didn't feel like a risk, just truth. I brushed my fingers against hers once more, careful, reverent, and she leaned back slightly, resting her forehead against my shoulder without a word. The simple gesture carried more weight than any confession. Time didn't matter. The world outside didn't exist for a moment. All that existed was this fragile, earned closeness between us. When she pulled back just enough to look at me, our eyes met, and I felt the quiet confirmation that whatever this was, it had settled into something real, earned, and lasting. No grand statements were needed. The moment itself held all the acknowledgement we required. I stood slowly, offering her a hand to rise, and she took it. Her fingers lingered in mine for a beat longer than necessary, and I didn't mind. As we straightened, the rain resumed outside, lightly tapping against the window. The sound no longer felt lonely. It felt like rhythm, accompaniment to a connection neither of us had sought but couldn't escape. And as we remained there, side by side, sharing that space, the quiet finality of it all pressed against me like a promise. It wasn't perfection, it wasn't dramatic, but it was ours, earned quietly, completely, and undeniably. I still remember that evening, though it's been months now. The bookstore smells of rain and old paper, a scent that will always pull me back to her, to the quiet moments when nothing needed to be said. Mara hasn't changed, still confident, still deliberate, but I've noticed her laughter is lighter now, like the weight she carried for years has found a place to rest. And me? I'm different too. I move slower in my thoughts, more patient, because I learned that some connections aren't meant to be rushed. I've learned to listen more, to notice the smallest details, the way her fingers tap when she's thinking, the faint crease in her brow when she's curious, the softness in her sighs when she's letting herself feel. We don't need grand gestures. We don't need declarations written in the sky. Our love, if it can even be called that, exists in glances, in touches that linger just long enough to matter, in silences that speak more than any sentence could. It's messy, it's imperfect, and it's ours. Sometimes I catch her looking at me while she thinks I'm focused on a book, and I smile because I know she feels the same quiet pull I do. The acknowledgement that we've found something rare, something earned, something unspoken yet undeniable. Life hasn't become simpler. Our worlds are still complicated. But there's a calmness now in the chaos, a steady warmth in the little rituals we've carved out together. It's not about owning each other or finishing each other's sentences. It's about being present, being honest, being willing to stay even when the silence between us is heavy. I've realized that love doesn't always arrive like a firework. Sometimes it seeps in, slowly, quietly, until you can't imagine a moment without it. And sometimes, the smallest gestures, an extra moment of eye contact, a hand brushing against yours, the shared knowledge that someone sees you, are enough to change everything. I still catch myself replaying our early encounters, the awkward glances, the stormy afternoons, the almost moments that never happened. And I understand now why those moments mattered. They built the space for the quiet collapse into something real. So, if you ever find yourself lingering near someone, noticing the way they exist in the world, take the time to stay. Sometimes the most important connections aren't shouted from rooftops. They're whispered, earned, and felt in the spaces between words. And as I glanced toward Mara, flipping through a notebook with that same faint crease in her brow, I realized that the most extraordinary part of this story isn't the beginning or the end. It's the in-between, the slow unfolding of recognition, trust, and belonging. So, maybe ask yourself tonight, is there someone whose presence lingers in your quiet moments? And if so, are you noticing them enough?